We've introduced two terms to you today so far, apocalypse, what do you think the apocalypse is, and worldview, and they're connected. So the prevailing worldview is visible across our society. It's held by the majority of the population. We'll refer to this view as that of the world, the world's view. I know that's confusing, but the worldview of the world and a biblical worldview, biblical view, and that's going to be back and forth, worldly and biblical. So this leading view of the world in the world today would be a worldly worldview, wouldn't it? It's a critical of a biblical worldview that they call religion. So many people will say to you, if you're a believer and follower of Jesus Christ, oh, you're religious, right? So you understand what that means. Now, the worldly worldview is that religion is meaningless and it's a restrictive mold. It's got this pretend being called God to enforce its rules, and the worldly view appears to prevail in government, which includes legislation, social policy, education, etc. The biblical worldview is often viewed as outdated, and the epitome of this opinion, you can find it in the deletion of blasphemy laws from Scottish common law through proposed hate crime legislation that's just worked its way through a little period of consultation that closed on Friday, and now you'll see members of Parliament, Scottish Parliament, vote on very restrictive hate crime legislation that includes how people think and how people act, but as one of its bylines is the deletion of blasphemy laws, which, let's face it, we're not looking to kill anybody because they said something about God that you don't think is true. But it's interesting that the state is taking a step back away from telling people, hey, don't talk about God that way. The worldly worldview is that God isn't there, or that he cannot be known so that disagreements between religions can be settled amicably. The laws about blasphemy are not relevant, and no one can agree what is blasphemy, and we can't agree about the punishment for blasphemy, so we're just going to strike it from the books entirely. And the world continues to turn away from God. The government is so sure that blasphemy is not a crime. There's no little agreement. There's so little agreement about what constitutes a crime against God that they've removed the laws from the books. And let's face it, that law was removed from the cultural heart years ago. The concern for how our actions are viewed by God is not found in most hearts today. So if you're upset that the government's taken a move, I would say, surprise, surprise, it has been revealed that in fact people walked away a long time ago, and now the laws will show it. Actions show the state of the heart, don't they? They do. I'm not arguing for a law about blasphemy, by the way. I'm talking about a moral reference for what anchors your worldview. There's a worldly view and there's a biblical view of the world. So, the worldly view prevails in folk culture, doesn't it? Movies, music, books, theater, video games. This is what has trained up your children. If you think about the hours that your kids spend playing games, talking to people through the headset, watching videos and listening to music, so YouTube, Spotify, whatever it is, there is a cultural value, there is a view of the world that is inculcated into our minds through what we hear and what we see, and the things that we hear people speak lead for us to respond to questions with information in our head. So what's apocalypse? And what will you say is the apocalypse? And where did you get that information from? Is what we're talking about ultimately today. If you haven't taught your kids that an idea is false or dangerous, they've come to believe that the worldly worldview is a true version of reality. And so how many people are wrestling with kids who believe something different than what you personally believe? How many of you are people who believe differently than what your parents believed? And what is behind these differing beliefs? Do you believe differently than your parents because you have come into a knowledge of God? You have come to understand who Jesus Christ is. You seek the will of God and you seek to live that way? Or are you differing from your parents because you don't actually share the same faith that they have, you come to see it a different way? And is your position actually based on something that you've learned in the world rather than what you've learned from God in the scripture as he reveals himself? These are important things. You have to consider that in your life. The biblical worldview isn't what we say we believe. Okay? The biblical worldview is shown by how we respond to what we actually believe. So you can say you believe something and then act in a way that's different than what you say. But what you do is in keeping in line with your beliefs. You may want to believe a particular thing, but your actions show what you actually believe. Be careful that you're telling yourself you believe something that you don't actually believe, because you won't live by it. These are tricky questions. But this is important as we talk about, and we're going to talk about apocalypse. What is the meaning of apocalypse? But we need to know, getting out of the box, how we live shows what we believe. And our actions reveal what we believe. And so we're going to take a little break there and come right back.